Hi, folks, and welcome to News from the Rebellion, the podcast where we listen to readings from newspapers during the time of the American Civil War. Each episode, we try to focus on a single news event in the timeline of the Civil War. We will read newspaper excerpts from both sides of the conflict, the North and the South. We will start with the side that initiated the first news story about the event. I want to acknowledge all the journalists back in the 1860s who left us a window to see what it was really like back in their time. Not only is listening to what was said in the papers an interesting way to hear the story of the Civil War, but it also provokes some other thoughts, like who is telling the story and why are they telling it that way? Today we're going to listen to what the papers are saying about the secession of southern states as the country rushes on to the start of the war. Let's go now to Charleston, South Carolina in December of 1860.
Charleston Mercury, Charleston, South Carolina, December 15, 1860. BY Telegraph. The latest news, presidential proclamation. Washington, December 15. The President has issued a proclamation appointing the 4th of January as a day of fasting, humiliation, and prayer in order to avert the alarming and immediate political danger and fearful distress and panic now threatening the country. He says that all hope now seems to have deserted the minds of men in this hour of calamity and peril, and to whom can we resort for relief but to God? His omnipotent arm alone can save us from the awful effects of our crimes and follies. Dispatch from the Charleston Mercury. Reports from Louisiana, New Orleans, December 14. The unanimous action of the Louisiana legislature in passing the convention bill is considered here as establishing the policy of immediate separate action in this state. After the state has resumed her sovereignty, a call for a general convention of the slaveholding states will be issued. The feeling in favor of secession is overwhelming. The legislature has appropriated $500,000 for arming the state. Highly important from Washington. General Cass resigns, the alleged reason President's banquet, etc., etc. General Lewis Cass, the Secretary of State, has resigned his place in the cabinet. It is said that his resignation was caused by the refusal of the President to strengthen the garrison of the fortifications in the harbor of Charleston. General Cass contended that the present force there was certain to be sacrificed to the fury of the secessionists. The President, on the other hand, is said to be well assured that no attempt will be made against the forts unless reinforcements should be sent. He therefore considers that Major Anderson and his command are in no danger whatsoever. The Republicans are dispirited at the Southern Union revulsion, now sweeping over the eastern, northern, middle, and southern states. Lincoln hung in effigy. A correspondent writing from Baldwin informs us that one Abe Lincoln, who has been elected president of the northern states, was recently hung in effigy in that town, and was afterwards committed to the flames with due and appropriate solemnities. To the polls on the 22nd. Let every voter deposit his ballot on the 22nd instant. Vote for straight-out secessionists, and get your friends to do likewise. A large vote is essential, so that the views of Florida should be thoroughly understood. South Carolina. This state will secede this week. The land of flowers will entwine around the palmetto on the 4th day of next month.
Charleston Mercury, Charleston, South Carolina, December 20th, 1860. Charleston Mercury. Extra. Passed unanimously at 1:15 p.m., December 20th, 1860. An ordinance to dissolve the union between the state of South Carolina and other states united with her under the compact entitled The Constitution of the United States of America. We, the people of the state of South Carolina, in convention assembled, do declare and ordain, and it is hereby declared and ordained, that the ordinance adopted by us in convention on the 23rd day of May, in the year of our Lord 1788, whereby the Constitution of the United States of America was ratified, and also all acts and parts of acts of the General Assembly of this state ratifying amendments of the said Constitution, are hereby repealed, and that the Union now subsisting between South Carolina and other states under the name of the United States of America is hereby dissolved. The Union is dissolved.
Yorkville Inquirer, Yorkville, South Carolina, January 3rd, 1861. We are out of the Union, and we thank God and South Carolina for it. We are no longer under the dominion of the North. The step which South Carolina has so boldly and gallantly taken is fraught with more and greater benefits to the human race than any one thing since the coming of Christ. It will give more force and power to the truth that man is capable of self-government. It will inaugurate the system of free trade all over the world and will lead to the overthrow of all those devices by which labor has been made subservient to power and robbed of its reward by cunning and designed men. It will establish the principle that governments are formed for the protection of the rights of every citizen, and not as an engine by which the rights of the many are to be seized for the benefit of the few. It is the dawn of the great political and moral millennium, which will extend its influence to all the world and to all future generations. It is the beginning of the time and the state of things for which we have long hoped and labored, and which we thank God we have lived to see.
New Orleans Daily Crescent, New Orleans, Louisiana, Saturday morning, January 12, 1861, Secession. To read the effusions of the black Republican press, one would suppose that secession was only another word for treason. They assert with vehement audacity that the Union was intended to be perpetual, that it was never in the contemplation of the framers of the Constitution that the states which entered into the Union should have the right to withdraw. They quote from the Articles of Confederation the words perpetual union, omitting, however, to state that these words were left out of the Constitution subsequently formed, and that the perpetual union which was spoken of in the Articles of Confederation, far from being perpetual, lasted only a very few years. If the states, under the Articles of Confederation, could break up a perpetual union, why may they not do the same under the Constitution, where nothing is said about the union being perpetual? But is the claim of the right of secession such a new thing that abolitionism must raise its hands in such holy horror at it? Not at all. On the contrary, it was a right claimed by some of the framers of the Constitution itself, and something about which the states were so scrupulous that some of them took the earliest opportunity, as soon after the adoption of the Constitution, as they saw this right in danger of being overshadowed and nullified by the federal government, to declare by solemn resolutions of their General Assemblies the same principles upon this subject that they have ever since maintained and defended the doctrine of state rights and state sovereignty. We refer, of course, to the celebrated Virginia and Kentucky resolutions of 98 and 99. In less than 10 years after the Constitution went into operation, these two states made it their special business to assert this right in order that there might be no mistake about it so far as they were concerned, and the resolutions adopted at that time have been cherished and defended ever since as expressive of the position held by the states of the Union towards the central federal government. Suppose that the South, having a majority of the electoral votes, should declare that they would only have slaveholders for president and vice president and should select such by their exclusive suffrage to rule over us at the North. Do you think we would submit to it? No, not for a moment. And do you believe that your Southern brethren are less sensitive on this subject than you are, or less jealous of their rights? If you do, let me tell you that you are mistaken. And therefore you must see that if this sectional party succeeds, it leads inevitably to the destruction of this beautiful fabric reared by our forefathers, cemented by their blood, and bequeathed to us as a precious inheritance.
The Daily Advocate, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, January 12, 1861. Mr. Benjamin's Peroration. We have already published a synopsis of Senator Benjamin's speech. The following is the peroration. And you, senators of the Republican Party, you assert, and your people assert that, under a just and fair interpretation of the federal Constitution, it is right to deny that our slaves, which directly or indirectly involve a value of $4,000, are property at all entitled to protection in the territories under and by the government. You assert that by a fair interpretation of that instrument, it is right to encourage by all possible means the robbery of this property, and to legislate so as to render its recovery as dangerous and difficult as possible. You say that it is right and proper under the Constitution to prevent our mere transit across a sister state, to embark with our property on a lawful voyage, without being openly despoiled of it. You assert that it is right and proper to hold us up to the ban of mankind, in speeches and writings, as thieves, robbers, villains, and criminals of the blackest dye, because we continue to own property which we owned at the time we all signed the compact. You say it is right that we should be disposed to spend our treasure in the purchase and our blood in the conquest of foreign territory, and yet have no right to enter it for settlement without leaving behind our most valuable property under penalty of its confiscation. Your fathers interpreted this instrument to mean safety and peace to all, and you say it is eminently in accordance with the beauty that our welfare and peace is to be preserved, that our sister states should combine to prevent our growth and development, and surround us with a cordon of hostile communities for the express and avowed purpose of accumulating in dense masses and within restricted limits a population which you believe to be dangerous, and thereby forcing us to sacrifice a property nearly sufficient in value to pay the public debt of every nation in Europe. This construction of the instrument which was to preserve our security and promote our welfare, and which we only signed on your assurance that such was its object, you tell us now is a fair construction. You don't propose to enter our states, you say, to kill and destroy our institutions, but you initiate the faith of force. Oh no, Fadamiscus, and you propose simply to enclose us in an embrace that will suffocate us. You don't propose to fell the tree you promised not to. You merely propose to girdle it and let it die. And then, when we tell you we don't understand this way, and your acting upon it in this spirit releases us from the obligations which accompany it, and under no circumstances can we consent to live together under that interpretation. And we say we will go. If you will let us go in peace, we are answered by your leading spokesman. Oh no, we cannot do that. We have no objection personally, but we are bound by our oaths. If you attempt it, your people will be hanged for treason. We have examined this instrument thoroughly, and we cannot find any warrant in it for releasing ourselves from the obligation of giving you all these benefits, and our oaths force us to tax you for it. We can dispense with anything else, but we protest upon our souls that our consciences will be sorely worried if we do not take your money. That is the proposition of the senator from Ohio, Mr. Wade. In plain language, we can dispense with anything and everything else, but how to get rid of taking your money we cannot see. Now, senators, this picture is not placed before you with any idea of acting upon any one of you, or that it will change the views or alter the conduct of any of you. All hope of that is gone. Our committee has reported this morning that no feasible scheme of adjustment can be devised. The day of adjustment has passed. If you propose to make one now, you are too late. And now, senators, within a very few weeks we part to meet again as senators in one common council chamber of the nation, no more forever. We desire, we beseech you, to let this parting be in peace, conjure you to indulge in no vain delusion, that duty or conscience or interest or honor impose upon you the necessity of invading our states and shedding the blood of our people. You have no possible justification for it. I trust it is from no craven spirit or any sacrifice of the dignity or honor of my own state that I make this last appeal, but from far higher and holier motives. If, however, it shall prove vain, if you are resolute to pervert the government, framed by the fathers for the protection of our rights, into an instrument for subjugating and enslaving us, then, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the universe for the rectitude of our intentions, we must meet the issue you force upon us as best becomes free men defending all that is dear to man. What may be the fate of this horrible contest none can foretell, but this much I will say: the fortunes of war may be adverse to our arms. You may carry desolation into our peaceful land, and with torch and firebrand may set our cities in flames. You may even emulate the atrocities of those who, in the days of the Revolution, hounded on the bloodthirsty savage. You may give the protection of your advancing armies to the furious fanatics who desire nothing more than to add the horrors of servile insurrection to civil war. You may do all this and more, but you never can subjugate us. You never can subjugate the free sons of the soil into vassals paying tribute to your power. You never can degrade them to a servile and inferior race. Never, never, never.
Jacksonville Republican, Jacksonville, Alabama. January 17, 1861. Jacksonville, Alabama. January 14, 1861. Alabama is free. Alabama today is free and independent. She has taken her position among the sovereign nations of the earth, with not a link remaining of that galling chain of vassalage which bound her to the Union. The stain upon her escutcheons, which the past entailed, is wiped out forever, and her first step is taken in the grand procession of sister states whose motto is liberty or death. Side by side with the gallant Commonwealth of South Carolina, she is her twain star in the firmament of a new confederacy to be built upon the ruins of the old, looming up. From the golden portals of the east, the sun throws his broad beams upon the landscapes of the very Eden of the South, the Palestine of a new republic. Alabama is redeemed and disenthralled forever. The day of her redemption shall be embalmed in poetry and consecrated by our children's children. The measure of her glory is full, orbed, and complete, and language gives place to shouts of triumph. Jacksonville, all alive! The glorious intelligence that Alabama had seceded on the 11th instant reached here on Sabbath about 8 o'clock at night, and after 12 at midnight, a scene of general festivity was opened by the firing of cannons and small arms, with music and banners, which continued until broad daylight. Never was a scene witnessed wherein old and young participated so unanimously. We are all together. 3 cheers for the gallant county of Calhoun. This news was received after our side was made up. Look out for important news in our issue on the day after tomorrow. Alabama out of the Union. The vote 61 to 39. A glorious day. We have only time to announce, as our evening edition goes to press, that the state convention has withdrawn Alabama immediately and unconditionally from the Union. The vote was taken about 2:30 o'clock and resulted 61 in favor to 39 against the ordinance. Truly, this is glory, enough for one day. Our citizens are bailing the new era with demonstrations of profound emotion. The Capitol grounds and streets are alive with the moving mass of the cheering throng. Cannons are booming and bells ringing. New Orleans, January 8. The election today has given a large majority for the secession candidates in this city. The state has also gone largely for secession. Charleston Courier, Washington, January 8th. General Scott is now the ruling spirit of the government and is for war unless the South presents a united front when he thinks war hopeless and impolity. Good news from New Orleans. New Orleans, Jan 7. There are great rejoicings in this city over the result of the convention election. All the secession candidates on the senatorial ticket and 21 out of 24 on the representative ticket are elected by a decided majority. There is no doubt that the state has gone for secession by an overwhelming vote.
The Daily Advocate, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Tuesday morning, January 22, 1861. The Georgia Convention. Passage of the Secession Ordinance. Rejoicing throughout the state. The people delirious with excitement. 36th Congress, Second Session, Milledgeville, January 19th, p.m. The ordinance for the immediate secession of the state of Georgia passed today with the following vote. Ayes 208, nays 89, majority 119. There is great rejoicing throughout the state. Guns are being fired, bells tolled, Lone Star flags unfurled to the breeze, and every manifestation of joy at the welcome verdict, the Ordinance of Secession, an ordinance to dissolve the union between the state of Georgia and other states united with her under the Compact of Government, entitled The Constitution of the United States. We, the people of the state of Georgia, in convention assembled, do declare and ordain, and it is hereby declared and ordained, that the ordinance adopted by the people of the state of Georgia in convention assembled in 1788, whereby the Constitution of the United States was assented to, ratified, and adopted. Also, all acts and parts of acts of the General Assembly ratifying and adopting amendments to said Constitution are hereby repealed, rescinded, and abrogated. We do further declare and ordain that the union existing between the state of Georgia and other states under the name and title of the United States of America is hereby dissolved, and that the state of Georgia is in full possession and exercise of all those rights of sovereignty which belong and appertain to a free and independent state. Rejoicing at Augusta. Augusta, January 19th, 10th AP. M. The city is illuminated. Fireworks, the firing of cannon, ringing of bells, etc., are among the manifestations of joy upon the reception of the news from the capital.
The Daily Advocate, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Tuesday morning, January 27th, 1861. Mims Taylor and Tom Bynum, editors and proprietor. Sunday morning, Jan 27, 1861, Independent, Louisiana. The secession ordinance passed on 17 noes. The Pelican flag unfurled. The proceedings of the state convention on Saturday, the 26th of January, mark an era in the story of the Commonwealth of Louisiana. On that day, the representatives of the sovereignty of the state, 10 minutes before the hour of 2 o'clock p.m., declared and ordained the separation of Louisiana from the government entitled the United States of America. During the vote on the ordinance, the most solemn and profound interest and attention was impressed upon the members and the large concourse of spectators assembled to witness the ceremony. As each of those elected on the cooperation ticket rose in their seats and feelingly gave their adhesion to the will of the majority, nothing could restrain the outbursts of applause from the audience. When the last vote was recorded, when the name of York of Concordia was called, the crowd began to move and whisper, and when the result was announced that only 17 out of 130 members had responded in the negative, there was such a hout as never before went up from the floor of the old Gothic building. At this moment, Captain H.W. Allen, walking in front of Governor Moore, Colonel Bragg, Ray, Mr. Linfield, Father Hubert, and other distinguished gentlemen, came down the central aisle bearing the glorious Pelican flag, the emblem of independent Louisiana, which was received with waving of handkerchiefs by the daughters of Louisiana and perfect hurricanes of applause from her gallant sons there assembled.
The Daily Exchange, Baltimore, Maryland, January 9, 1861. The national crisis, important from the South. Florida secedes from the Union. Alabama will resist Lincoln's administration. Secession triumphant in Louisiana. Tallahassee, John Bowers 7. A resolution declaring that it is the right and duty of Florida to secede was passed 62 yeas to 5 nays. A committee of 13 reported an ordinance of secession which was adopted.
Harper's Weekly, New York City, New York, January 19th, 1861. Secession of Mississippi, Florida, and Alabama. The Mississippi State Convention on the 8th adopted an ordinance providing for immediate secession from the Union. Reports from Jackson, the capital of Mississippi, confirm this news. On 10th, Florida seceded by 62-7. On 11th, Alabama seceded by 61-31. New York speaking out. Both branches of the New York State Legislature, on the 11th, concurred in adopting a preamble and resolutions presented by Speaker Littlejohn, commending the recent message of President Buchanan, tendering to him whatever aid in men and money he may require to enforce the laws, complimenting the Union-loving representatives and citizens of the border slave states upon the patriotism and courage with which they stand by the Union, and requesting the governor to send copies of the resolutions to the president and the governors of all the states. In the Senate, they were amended by declaring that treason exists in one or more states, and only Mr. Grant voted against them. In the Assembly, there were 117 votes in favor of, and only 2, Messrs. Cozans and Varian, against them. Suffering in Charleston. According to a dispatch in the Herald, terrible suffering already exists at Charleston. The troops who have volunteered and presented themselves for service are camped in unhealthy locations, and in consequence of rain, swamps, and miasma, are suffering from disease. No vessels loading, no business doing, women weeping, and men overcome by sickness, and the city in the hands of a mob is the bulletin travelers present of the condition of things at the present time. Negro insurrections in Alabama. A gentleman in Troy has received a private letter dated at Hayneville, Alabama, December 25th, which says, "Our people are greatly excited now on 2 subjects, the certain withdrawal of Alabama from the Union and Negro insurrections. About 20 miles from here, they have discovered a plot among the Negroes, headed by a white man, or perhaps more than one, to rise on the 26th of this month and murder all the white folks they could find. The plot was providentially discovered, the white men arrested, and after establishing their guilt beyond a doubt, they were hung up, together with 5 or 6 Negroes. Today I hear of another plot about 30 miles from here, in another direction. 3 white men have been arrested and about 30 Negroes. Report says they will hang today. The white men are Northern men."
The Weekly Standard, Raleigh, North Carolina, Wednesday, April 17, 1861. Rumors from Washington. It is stated that on Monday last Mr. Lincoln would issue a proclamation calling forth the militia from all the states to the aggregate number of 75,000 in order to suppress the combinations in the seceded states and cause the laws to be duly executed. The first service required, it is said, would probably be to repossess the forts, places, and property which have been seized from the United States. It is stated that the proclamation referred to convenes Congress on the 4th of July. The Richmond and Petersburg papers of Monday contain what purports to be the above proclamation, which they say was to be published in the Washington papers of the same day. We shall soon know whether the proclamation referred to is genuine or not. P.S. Since the above was written, we have heard on what we deem good authority that the proclamation referred to is genuine. We will publish it in our next. We very much fear that a general civil war impends. We have told our readers from the first that secession meant civil war and the destruction of civil liberty. We repeat what we said in the last presidential campaign and what we said in our last issue, that the Union cannot be maintained by force. It will fall to pieces before the first touch of aggressive or coercive power. Mr. Lincoln may call, but North Carolina will extend no aid to him in any effort to coerce the Confederate States. The leaders and many of the people of those states have grievously erred, but any attempt to coerce them or to put them down by force will make bad infinitely worse. The soil of North Carolina must not be polluted by the tread of armed men sent to make war on the Confederate States. The mission of the border states now is to command the peace, if possible, and to maintain their rights in the Union. If they cannot check and control the 2 extremes, no other power can.
Chicago Tribune, Chicago, Illinois, April 12, 1861. Virginia loyalty. The following infamous resolution passed the Virginia Convention on Wednesday. It describes exactly the position of the Chicago Times and harmonizes with the views of the Democratic candidates on the bogus Union ticket, which it so warmly supports. Richmond, Virginia, April 10th. The following resolution was adopted by the convention today. Virginia will await reasonable time for an answer to her propositions, but with the indispensable condition that a pacific policy be adopted towards the seceded states, not to attempt to subject them to federal authority, nor reinforce the forts, or recapture forts, arsenals, or other property, or exact payment of duties, and that all forts in seceded states ought to be evacuated. The plain English of this resolution is that Virginia pledges herself to hold the federal government while Jeff Davis and his disunion Confederates cut its throat. Virginia will wait a reasonable time for the South to coerce the North into her disgraceful pro-slavery demands. She will leave the Union if those exactions are not granted, but with the indispensable condition that, while the free states are making up their minds to accept or reject the terms dictated, the federal government shall be gagged, handcuffed, and put under bonds to allow Jeff Davis and company to do just as they please. There is to be no reinforcing or provisioning of Fort Sumter or Pickens, no collection of federal revenues in seceded states, but on the contrary, all the said forts must be evacuated, the right of secession granted, and the independence of New Dahomey acknowledged. Such are the market terms of the class of people in Virginia who call themselves moderates, conservatives, peacemen, and Union men. We have a class of men in this very city who correspond exactly with those Virginia cowboys and Tories. Many of them are from the same state, and the others have been inoculated by the same virus. Next Tuesday, they expect to carry the municipal election of Chicago by sailing under false colors. The unionism to which they are devoted is exactly of the stripe of the Richmond article. Let every honest and patriotic man beware of the wolves in sheep's clothing. The true and only Union men are those who uphold and support the President and his administration in their efforts to maintain the Constitution and enforce the laws. All others are bogus and enemies of their country.
Detroit Free Press, Detroit, Michigan, Friday morning, April 12th, 1861. Latest news by telegraph, the national crisis. 7,000 troops at the Charleston fortifications, District of Columbia militia placed on duty. The Southern commissioners leave Washington. 3,000 or 4,000 men enrolled at Baltimore for desperate designs. Lincoln has knowledge that an attack on Washington is contemplated. He desires Northern governors to hold their militia in readiness. The steamer South Carolina, supposed to have spoken the war fleet. Secession of Arizona. 2 companies of troops from Virginia gone to Charleston. Reported confirmation of the report that Jeff Davis had telegraphed not to fire on vessels carrying supplies to Sumter. Lincoln apprehends a collision at Charleston, but not till Saturday. Guns brought to bear on Fort Pickens. Troops at Fort Kearny ordered off. All naval officers at Philadelphia ordered to be ready for duty in 10 days. The legislature of Massachusetts authorized the putting of 2,000 militia on a war footing. Report that Beauregard has demanded the evacuation of Sumter. Rumor that a fight would thus commence at 8 last evening. Thousands of persons assembled to witness the attack. Charleston, South Carolina, April 10th. Wigfall, Chestnut, Means, McGowan, and Boyle have received appointments in General Beauregard's staff. A large number of the members of the convention, after adjournment, volunteered as privates. About 7,000 troops are now at the fortifications. Washington, April 10th. Of the National Rifles, of over 60 members, only half consented to be mustered. The reason for this, as in other similar cases, was that some of the men were apprehensive they would be ordered to some point beyond the limits of the District of Columbia, while others were unwilling to take the oath, which might compel them to fight against Maryland and Virginia or other southern states. It is said they were informed that the oath must be taken unconditionally, and the infraction of which exposed them to punishment under the rules and articles of war. Captain Carrington's company of 80 men were mustered into service to a man. The accepted companies have already been placed on duty. A new military department, formed of Maryland and the District of Columbia, is to be established with Colonel C.P. Smith commandant and Captain Talbot adjutant. Sherman's artillery from Fort Ridgely, Minnesota, and 2 other companies of cavalry are expected here tomorrow. Richmond, Virginia, April 10th. The extreme Unionists in the convention say they are not to be moved by telegraphic dispatches and indicate that they will stand by the government if the steamers are attacked. The conservatives entertained different sentiments. The convention amended the 13th resolution and passed it. It is as follows. In the opinion of this convention, the people of Virginia will regard any action of the federal government or of the Confederate States tending to produce a collision of forces, pending the efforts to effect an adjustment of existing difficulties, as unwise and injurious to the interests of both, and they would regard any such action on the part of either as leaving them free to determine their own future policy. The convention adjourned. Greensburg, Indiana, April 11th. A secession flag with 7 stars was raised here on the west tower of the courthouse this morning as the 9 o'clock train was passing through. Great indignation was manifested by the citizens. The flag was taken down and the stars and stripes raised in its stead. New York, April 11th. A Times dispatch from Washington says, "It is understood on good authority that the government and Major Anderson will demand an explanation from Governor Pickens of his refusal to allow Lieutenant Talbot to return to Fort Sumter. South Carolina will be held responsible, as it is not the intention of the President to treat with Jeff Davis or the Confederacy officially." The Southern Commissioners leave tomorrow morning for the South. The Tribune's dispatch says 3,000 or 4,000 men are known to be enrolled at Baltimore, ready for any desperate design which may promise reward. Measures have been taken to break up this poisonous organization. The Herald's Washington dispatch says that the president told a visitor today that decisive events need not be looked for before the last day of this week. He remarked, "We will then see whether they dare to fire upon an unarmed vessel to provision our starving soldiers." He expressed that little hope of the preservation of peace, but evinced a decided determination to relieve Major Anderson and to hold the other Southern forts at all hazards. Dispatches from Montgomery say that Jeff Davis is considering the propriety of going to Charleston. President Lincoln says he has positive knowledge that an attack on Washington is in contemplation. He has communicated this information to several governors of northern and western states. It is understood that he desires them to call out the militia and hold them in readiness at a moment's warning. It is understood that Governor Curtin will call out the Pennsylvania volunteers on the least sign of danger for the occupation of the Capitol. A leading Ohio Democrat dispatches to the president as follows: "We are for you to the death if you will hold Fort Sumter. The necessity of holding it is absolute."
Tri-Weekly Mercury, the Charleston, South Carolina, May 1st, 1861. The war news. All doubt of a fierce war of sections seems now to be dispelled. The North has thrown off its disguise. The breaking loose of the pent-up males furnishes us with an avalanche of exchanges from which we make some interesting selections. The terms of peace. Yet the New York Tribune of the 1st mildly tells us what we are to expect. It says,
"The only terms of peace which would not provoke a revolution in all the loyal states would be the unconditional submission of the traitors, the abandonment of the Montgomery government, the surrender of the stolen federal property, and the return of all the seceding states to obedience to the laws. We have no doubt this will be done at last. But not until the main question has been debated in 1 or 2 considerable battles, until they are beaten in war, the seceders will never abandon their great conspiracy, and the sooner and the more decidedly they are beaten, the better for all concerned. On the other hand, the people of the North and West are resolved that the business shall now be disposed of forever, that rebellion shall be crushed, and the integrity of the Republic maintained. We mean to conquer them, not merely to defeat, but to conquer, to subjugate them, and we shall do this the most mercifully, the more speedily we do it. But when the rebellious traitors are overwhelmed in the field and scattered like leaves before an angry wind, it must not be to return to peaceful and contented homes. They must find poverty at their firesides and see privation in the anxious eyes of mothers and the rags of children. It is little enough the slaves will do when masters are at the wars, and to be idle and wasteful is the least harmful thing in which they are likely to engage themselves. There will be little cotton raised in the southern states this year, and that little must pay the enhanced expense of a new route to market, if allowed to get at all, the price thereof to be returned in the bare necessities of life, in limited quantities, at starvation prices. The whole coast of the South, from the Delaware to the Rio Grande, must be a solitude, save from the presence of a blockading squadron, so that no relief shall come into the beleaguered people from the sea. The other great highway, the Mississippi, it is the duty of the West to bold and to prohibit its use, either partially or totally, as the obstinacy of these infatuated rebels shall promise to be of a shorter or longer duration. The West can drown or starve the lower country as it pleases, if a continued rebellious obstinacy shall compel the North to accept the alternative. If Maryland goes out of the Union, and Baltimore continues contumacious, the same means of coercion should be resorted to. If Baltimore should be anything more than the name of an extinct city after the secession of that state, not another barrel of flour, not another bushel of corn, not another hog, not so much as a spring chicken, should be allowed to approach her by land or water. Halfway measures will not do with an enemy who will conquer us and desecrate all this fair land with their accursed barbarism, unless we conquer them.
Well, that's our show for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe.